Hello YouTube, this is Mario here with Off the Walls Magic for our first ever video. Kind of been holding off on doing this for a while because Standard has been super dry lately, what with there really only being two viable deck options. I mean a few others, but not really as competitive. But with the banning of Felidar Guardian, it has become a brewer's paradise. And so I whipped up this deck recently and got an awesome idea early this morning, about 1:30 or so, on how to make it even better. So we are talking a mono blue control deck for Standard. Has been tested against Delirium, against Mardu vehicles before I made the changes today. You know, won some matches, minor misplays here and there against Mardu vehicles, but I'm really thinking that some of these changes that I made are going to help out. So, getting to the deck real quick, we're going to start with one of the key cards to the deck, I think. And personally, one of my favorite creatures created in a long time. We are talking 4 copies of Baral, Chief of Compliance. So 2 mana gets you a legendary 1/3 instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. You guys already know what this card does. It's been around for a few months now. Hasn't really seen that much play, to be honest, but I like it, and it really seems to be the glue to this deck that keeps it all together. Going on, we are also running 4 copies of Thing in the Ice. Thing in the Ice, 2 mana for a 0/4 defender. Enters battlefield with 4 ice counters. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, remove a counter from Thing in the Ice. Then if it has 0 counters on it, you transform it into the Awoken Horror. A 7/8, when it transforms into the Awoken Horror, return all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands. This card in this deck has really changed the board state very well on Friday. I was very impressed with how it worked. Now going on, lots of 2-drops in this deck, because ultimately in this deck we are going to be casting things for free, and what better to cast for free than things that slow down your opponent. So up next we are running 4 copies of Essence Scatter. Now, even before Felidar Guardian got banned, this card needed to be reprinted for some time. It is a 2 mana instant counter target creature spell. So many creatures, so many targets in Standard right now. So just a very good, that is the one counter spell in this deck that we are running 4 copies of. Continuing down the counter spell type, card type, I guess you would say, we're running 3 copies of Negate. Take out removal spells, take out counter spells. Because while this is a control deck, this does win with combat damage. And so I want to be getting in as much damage as possible. I want my creatures to survive as long as possible, and ultimately I'd like to frustrate my opponents into quitting, if that's even possible. Well, actually that was possible against a Delirium deck. Up next we are running 3 copies of Censor. This is a really good tempo play for turn 2, turn 3. 2 mana, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. You can pay a blue to discard it and then draw a new card. Very versatile, slows down our opponents pretty nice. And if you don't need it, you can pitch it for a better response. Lastly, for the 2-drops, we're running 3 copies of Anticipate. Look at the top 3, put one of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. It is important to know also that when you have a Baral on the field, all of these 2 mana spells only cost 1. And there are other targets in this deck that minor reduction can actually be a total game changer. We are only running 23 lands in this, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Up next was a card that I was very excited for from Amonkhet. We're running not 1, not 2, but 3 copies of As Foretold, which may seem very slow in Standard, but at the previous FNM, when I did get to play test this deck against some other people, because there weren't enough people for Constructed to actually fire off that event, we ended up being stuck drafting. This did get out of hand in some of those practice matches. So 3 mana, You get an enchantment. Each upkeep, put a time counter on As Foretold. Once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cast with converted mana cost X or less, where X is the number of time counters on As Foretold. Now, it is important to note with that card that it does not say that the card has to be cast from your hand. There is a target in this deck that can be cast from the graveyard. It is an Aftermath spell, and I did actually get to cast the Aftermath cost for free with As Foretold against a Mardu Vehicles deck. I still ended up losing because I did misplay. Should have swung out with some of my creatures when I had the chance. Failed to do so. That was on me. Up next, we have 2 copies of Disallow. 3 mana, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Very versatile, can counter, planeswalker abilities, creatures, non-creatures. Anything that I don't have another response for is what I would end up casting the Disallow for. Now, I'm going to save the 4 copies of the last 3 mana sorcery for the end, because it is a very spicy card that I just kind of... That's what made me change the deck early this morning. I was very excited when I realized that it was not only doable, but also helps the deck. So I'm going to get to that in a little bit. Getting to that Aftermath card, we are running 2 copies of Commit to Memory. So Commit, 4 mana, instant speed, put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library, second from the top. Very annoying to go up against. But then the Memory side, for 6 mana, or 5 if you have Brawl, or 0 if I have As Foretold with 6 time counters on it. Each player shuffles his or her hand and graveyard into his or her library, then draws 7 cards. Now, not only am I getting all of the previously cast instant sorcery, and creatures that made their way into the graveyard, or lands that made their way into the graveyard, I am also able to now draw 7 cards and shut down Delirium, because they no longer have a graveyard themselves, and Delirium decks without Delirium itself is not as strong as they would like. It makes it very easy to overrun if they can't activate their Delirium. Up next, we have a single copy of Baral's Expertise. Return up to 3 target artifacts and or creatures to their owner's hands for 5 mana, then cast a spell with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. I'm just main decking one of these because Mardu Vehicles is a big threat, but in other decks that maybe don't run as many creatures, don't run as many artifacts, or if I've been controlling the game enough, it tends to be just a dead spell in my hand. So I'm running a 1-of in the main board for the Baral's Expertise. Up next is another card from Amonkhet that I was super excited about, and proves to be a very annoying threat to get rid of. I am running 4 copies of Amonkhet's Glyph Keeper. That is 5 mana, gets you a 5/3 flyer. Whenever Glyph Keeper becomes a target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, counter that spell or ability, which then also triggers Baral triggers, so it lets me draw a card, discard what I don't need, and then you can embalm it for 7, so exile it from your graveyard, put a token on the battlefield, that's a copy of it. And then, before we get to that last sorcery, just going through the mana base real quick, very simple, a single Blighted Cataract for just card draw, taps for wastes, and then I'm running 4 copies of Sunscorched Desert, which, honestly, this is a pretty funny turn 1 play. It confused some of my opponents. It's like, hey, here's a colorless land, enters battlefield, deals 1 damage to you. This deck does win via combat damage, so that's good. Also, the tapping for waste is very relevant in this deck, which I will get to in a minute. Then just running 18 copies of Basic Islands. Now, back to that 1 sorcery that I talked about, the 3 mana sorcery that I was very excited about. 3 mana, 2 if I have Brawl, or 0 if I have an As Foretold out with 3 time counters. I'm running 4 copies of Coax from the Blind Eternities. You may choose an Eldrazi card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card, put it into your hand. The official ruling for this card, according to the Gatherer, is in competitive play, it has to come from the sideboard or in exile. So in the sideboard is where the action is really happening as far as Coax on the Blind Eternities comes in handy. So really it's like, if I were running these Eldrazi in the main board, it's like, hey, here's this card. No, it's kind of a dead card if I don't have a reason to cast it at the time being. But this gives me options. This lets me run as much of the value as I want in the main board, and then I can just kind of get Eldrazi out of my sideboard as needed. I'm only running a total of 6 in the main board right now. Might throw in a Drowner of Hope, maybe, per the recommendation of one of my friends. But I am running 3 copies of Thought-Knot Seer. So 4/4, when Thought-Knot Seer enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand, you choose a non-land card from it, and exile that card. When Thought-Knot Seer leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card. Now, again, I have the mana sources between the Sunscorched Deserts and the Blighted Cataract and the Islands to actually cast that for its full value, but if I have a Brawl's Expertise in hand, I can pop 3 targets back to their owner's hands. If I have the As Foretold out with 4 loyalty or 4 time counters on it, then I can cast that Thought-Knot Seer for free. But usually, what I would like to do is turn 1, Sunscorched Desert, deal the damage. Turn 2, drop an island, drop a Brawl on the field. Probably survives. Hopefully, if not the end of the world. Turn 3, drop another island, tap the island at the Sunscorched Desert, cast Cooks from the Blind Eternities, fetch up a Thought-Knot Seer, put that into my hand, just keep these separate because it's a sideboard, and then turn 4, I can just drop that Thought now and really just start making tempo plays. Additionally, we are running 3 copies of Reality Smasher. It is 5 mana for a 5/5 trample haste. Whenever it becomes a target of a spell that an opponent controls, counter that spell unless its controller discards a card. So either they're going to target it to try and get rid of it, they have to discard one of their possible responses, or if they don't, it gets countered. If it gets countered, then that triggers Brawl, Chief of Compliance, lets me draw a card, discard what I don't need. This deck is very spicy. I honestly love it very much. Anyways, back to the sideboard. Running 1 more copy of Brawl's Expertise, just in case. And then 2 copies of Engulf the Shore. 4 mana, return to their owner's hands all creatures with toughness less than or equal to the number of islands you control. I'm running 18 islands, can be very powerful. Instant speed, save your life kind of deal. Continuing the sideboard, we have 2 more copies of Commit to Memory, and then 4 copies of Unsubstantiate. And just going back to this Commit to Memory real quick, another reason I like this card so much, that Aftermath cost, because it does say that you cast a spell only from your graveyard, then exile it, you are casting it, which means that Brawl, Chief of Compliance, does reduce its mana cost. So even casting Memory from your graveyard, it can either cost you 6 mana, 5 mana, or 0 mana, which is really fun, really exciting, gets you a bunch of cards, and in a control deck, you want cards. Going back to the Cooks from the Blind Eternities real quick, I did consult with judges just because I wasn't sure exactly how it worked at first, but when they elaborated it to me, I was very excited. So you cast Cooks from the Blind Eternities, you drop a Thought-Knot Seer from your sideboard. You could cast the Thought-Knot Seer, exile a threat, say they kill it. It actually goes to the graveyard, not back to the sideboard, which means that if you have some Eldrazi that were in the sideboard and they get killed off, you can cast Memory, and then they would actually get shuffled back into your library, and you can redraw them and reuse them. It makes it very persistent, very annoying, and that is my first installation of Off the Walls Magic. I hope you guys liked the video. If you want to hit that subscribe button, the like button, leave a comment, I would greatly appreciate it. I am trying to get this channel up and running. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while, just never got around to it. Anything you guys can say to make suggestions for improving the channel, or if you guys have anything you want to say about the deck, please do not hesitate. Let me know. I greatly appreciate any feedback. And Tybalt the Fiend-Blooded here, greatest Planeswalker ever. That is obviously a joke. He is terrible. Well, just his +1. We're not getting into that now. Tybalt here would appreciate it, though. I look forward to hearing from you guys soon. Thank you.